The letter had been waiting on that bench for 6 months, when the woman who needed it finally sat down. It had survived a whole winter. Folded into a plain envelope, wedged down deep in the gap between the seat slats and the armrest where the rain couldn't reach it, it had sat through the gray months, while the pond at the bottom of Halloran Park froze and thawed and froze again, and nobody found it. Because the people who sat on that bench in winter were not the kind of people who go looking through the cracks for hidden things. On a flat morning in early spring, a 46-year-old woman named Donna Marsh sat down on that bench harder than she meant to. The way you sit when your legs have just stopped wanting to carry you anywhere in particular. And her hand fell into the gap, and her fingers touched paper. She almost didn't pull it out. She nearly left it. Because Donna Marsh had not come to that park to find anything. She had come to give up. She had a duffel bag at her feet. By that afternoon, she was supposed to be on a bus to her sister's place 3 states away, to the spare room and the folded-out couch, and the quiet end of a life that had stopped going anywhere. The apartment was already given up. The job had been gone 6 months. And somewhere in those 6 months, Donna had quietly, privately, without telling a single soul, given up on the rest of it too. On the idea that she was still somebody, that 19 years of being kind to strangers across a counter had added up to anything, that there was any corner of the world that would notice if Donna Marsh simply stopped. She pulled the envelope out of the gap because she had a few minutes before the bus and nothing left to do with them. On the front, in plain handwriting, it said, "Whoever needs this." She sat very still for a moment. Then she opened it. She did not know it had been left there by Keanu Reeves. She would not know that for a long time. All she knew was that someone, 6 months before, had sat exactly where she was sitting, and had felt close enough to whatever she was feeling to leave words behind for a stranger. The letter, it would turn out, had found her at the only moment in her whole life when it could have done what it did. There is a diner called the Bluebird on the east side of the city, and for 19 years it had been the place Donna Marsh poured her life into 1 cup of coffee at a time. She had started there at 27, after the first dream. There had been a dream once. The way there's always a dream once, it doesn't matter now what it was, had quietly closed its door. She had expected the Bluebird to be a stop. It became the whole road. And somewhere in those 19 years, without deciding to, Donna had found the thing a lot of people spend their whole lives looking for and never get. She had become very, very good at something, and the something had been kindness. She knew her regulars. She knew old Mr. Petrosian took his eggs at the counter every morning at 6:40 and had since his wife passed, and that the eggs were not really why he came. She knew which booth the night shift nurses liked and kept it open. She knew the family in 4 was struggling and found ways to comp a kid's grilled cheese without anyone losing face. She was not a waitress who was waiting to be something else. She had become someone, right there behind that counter in an apron, and she had been quietly proud of it in a way she never said out loud. Then the Bluebird was sold. The new owner, a man named Garrett Mills, who had bought 3 diners that year and ran them off a tablet, looked at his numbers and decided the place needed to be, in his word, freshened, younger faces. Lower wages. Donna's 19 years showed up on his spreadsheet, not as a lifetime of loyalty, but as the highest hourly rate on the schedule. He was not cruel about it. That was almost the worst part. He was pleasant. He handed her a final check and a folded paper and thanked her for her service. And a 46-year-old woman who had been the heart of a place for 19 years walked out the back door past the dumpsters. And that was that. She told herself she'd find something. For a while, she tried. But 46 is a hard age to start over as a stranger, and every place she walked into saw the same thing Garrett's spreadsheet had seen. Too old to be cheap, too set to be molded. The savings went. The confidence went faster. And somewhere in the long gray slide of those 6 months, the mornings started arriving that she couldn't find a reason to get up for, and she stopped telling anyone how far down it had gone, and she made the quiet decision that broke nobody's heart because nobody knew she'd made it, that she was done, that she'd go to her sisters and disappear into being no one, and that the part of her life where she'd mattered to anybody was over. That was the woman who sat down on the bench. That was the woman the letter found. The man who left it had sat on that same bench 6 months earlier, in the autumn, carrying something he didn't have anywhere to put. He had lost someone. The story of who and how is not the part that matters here, and he didn't put it in the letter either. What matters is that on a particular gray afternoon, the kind of afternoon that feels like more than a person can carry, he had not known what to do with himself. And so he had done what people do. He had gone to a park, because a park asks nothing of you. And he had sat down on a bench under the big elm by the pond. And he had let the afternoon be as heavy as it was. He was not, in that moment, anyone famous. Grief doesn't care who you are. It flattens everybody down to the same size, which is the size of a person on a bench who isn't sure how to get through the next hour. He sat there a long time. And at some point, because he had learned somewhere along the way that the only way through certain afternoons is to put the weight down somewhere outside yourself, he took a pen and a piece of paper out of his jacket, and he started to write. He did not write to anyone. He had no one in mind. He wrote, more than anything, to survive the afternoon, to say the true things out loud, even if only to the page, the things a stranger had once said to him at his own lowest, and that had, improbably, kept him going. And when he was done, he did a thing he couldn't fully explain even to himself. Instead of taking the letter home, or throwing it away, he folded it into an envelope, wrote 3 words on the front, and wedged it down into the gap in the bench where the rain wouldn't get it. For whoever sat there next on a day like his. He almost felt foolish doing it. He had no way of knowing if anyone would ever find it, or if they'd just toss it, or if it would rot in the gap and feed the worms. He left it anyway. Then he stood up and put his hands in his pockets and walked out of the park and went on with the long work of carrying his own afternoon. And he never thought about the letter again. He did not need to know whether it landed. The leaving of it had been the whole point. He had no idea it would sit there through an entire winter. He had no idea that on the far side of that winter, a woman with a duffel bag at her feet and a bus to catch would sit down hard in the exact spot and reach into the exact gap on the one morning when the words he'd left would be the difference between a bus and a life. Real grace, the kind that counts, almost never gets to see where it lands. Donna unfolded the single page. The handwriting was plain, a little hurried, a man's hand. There was no date and no name at the top. It just started, the way you start when you're already in the middle of something. She read the first lines, and then she stopped and read them again because they were addressed to exactly where she was sitting. If you're reading this, you probably needed somewhere to sit. People don't end up on a bench like this on a good day. They end up here when they've run out of other places to go. So I'm going to tell you a few true things, in case nobody's told you any in a while. Donna looked up. The pond. The elm, a jogger going by, who did not know that anything in the world was happening on that bench. She looked back down. She read the rest sitting very still, and somewhere in the middle of it she started to cry, quietly. The way a person cries when they have been holding something for 6 months and a stranger has just, without knowing it, set it down for them. She read all of it. Then she read all of it again, and the second time, it was less like reading and more like being talked to by someone who had somehow known she'd be there. "I sat right where you're sitting," the letter said, "at about the lowest I have ever been. I lost somebody. I won't get into it, because it's mine and you've got your own. But I came to this exact bench because I didn't know what else to do with the afternoon, and the afternoon felt like more than I could carry. So if that's where you are right now, I've been in that seat. The actual seat. You are not the first person to come apart on this exact bench, and you will not be the last, and I know it doesn't help much, but there is a strange kind of company in that. You're not as alone on it as it feels. Here's the thing I figured out, sitting here. The reasons to keep going are almost never big ones. Nobody I've ever known got saved by a grand reason. People get saved by small, stubborn, almost stupid little reasons. The way the light comes through that elm at about 4 in the afternoon. A cup of coffee tomorrow that you haven't had yet. Somebody who would miss you a great deal more than they have ever managed to say. The fact that today is, statistically, a terrible day to make a permanent decision, and tomorrow gets its own vote. I don't know what happened to you. Maybe somebody told you that you don't matter. Maybe nobody told you anything, and that was the problem. Maybe you just slid out of everyone's view and started to believe that being unseen is the same as being worthless. It isn't. I promise you it isn't. The two things feel identical from the inside, and they are not the same thing at all. So if you've run clean out of your own reasons, you can borrow mine for a while. I'm still here. Most days I'm even glad of it, which 6 months ago I would not have believed I'd be able to write. Don't decide the big thing today. Just decide today. Get up off this bench and go do one small, ordinary thing. And let that be the whole plan. The rest can wait. It really can. You matter. Somebody who never met you sat on this bench and thought hard about you and hoped you'd be okay. That's a real thing that really happened. Carry it. Kay Donna Marsh sat on that bench for a long time after she finished. A stranger had thought about her. 6 months before she'd ever sat down. A stranger had run out of reasons too, on this same warped slat of wood, and had clawed his way to one more day and then left the rope dangling for whoever came next. And she had been the one to grab it. The improbability of it, that she had sat down in that one spot, on that one morning, and reached into that one gap, felt less like luck and more like being found. Get up off this bench and go do one small, ordinary thing. She did not get on the bus. She would not have been able to explain it to anyone, and for a long time she didn't try. She just folded the letter back into its envelope and put it in the breast pocket of her coat where she could feel it against her. And she picked up the duffel bag, and instead of walking to the bus station, she walked back into the city. She did the one small, ordinary thing. She went into a coffee shop 3 blocks from the park. The kind with a hand-lettered help wanted sign in the window that she had walked past a dozen times in the gray months and not had the heart to try for. And she asked to talk to whoever did the hiring. She did not get the job that day. It didn't matter. She had done the thing the letter told her to do, and the doing of it had cracked something open that had been welded shut for 6 months. The simple, enormous idea that tomorrow might be allowed to be different from today. She kept the letter in her coat pocket all that spring. On the bad mornings, and there were still plenty, she read it again. You matter. Somebody who never met you sat on this bench and thought hard about you. It was, she said later, the only thing some mornings that got her vertical. A man she had never met was the reason she got out of bed, and he had no idea, and would never have any idea. And that was somehow exactly why it worked. It did not all turn around at once. That spring was still hard, and the summer after it was not easy either. But Donna got the coffee shop job, eventually, the third time she went back, because the owner finally saw what 19 years at the Bluebird had actually built. A woman who could make a frightened stranger feel, for the length of one transaction, like the most important person in the room. Within 2 years she was running the place. Within 5 she had a little cafe of her own, 8 tables, nothing fancy. The kind of place where the regulars' orders are known, and the kid who can't quite pay gets his sandwich anyway, and nobody's 19 years are ever a line on a spreadsheet. She hired the people other places looked past. The too old, the started over. The ones with the gray slide behind their eyes that she recognized, because she'd had it herself. She knew what it was to be seen as a cost. She built a place where people got seen as people. And she started leaving letters on the bench. She couldn't not. The first one took her a month to write, and she felt foolish the whole time. The same foolishness she'd later realize that the stranger must have felt. She wedged it down into the same gap and wrote 3 words on the front: "Whoever needs this," because she didn't know his name to honor it any other way. Over the years, she left a lot of them. Sometimes they were gone when she came back, and she never knew who took them. Once, a young man wrote back, left his own letter in the gap, signed only with an initial, and the chain went on from there without her. Strangers leaving rope for strangers on a bench by a pond, none of them knowing each other's faces. She found out who Kay was almost by accident, years later. She was half watching an interview one night, an actor talking quietly about a dark stretch he'd come through, and he said, almost in passing, that there had been an afternoon he'd sat on a bench in a park and written a letter to a stranger he'd never meet, and left it behind. Because a stranger had once done something like that for him, and he'd never known if it found anyone, and he hoped, sometimes, that it had. Donna Marsh sat up very slowly in her chair. She did not write to him. She thought about it for a week and decided against it, and the reason she decided against it was the truest thing she understood about the whole story, that the letter had worked precisely because it asked for nothing back. A thank you would have made it a transaction. It had never been a transaction. It had been a stranger leaving the lights on for whoever was lost in the dark behind him. So instead, she drove to Halloran Park, and she sat on the bench under the elm, and she wrote one more letter. She did not address it to him. She addressed it the way he had taught her to whoever needed it next. But at the bottom, under her own initial, she added one line she'd never added before, a line only one person in the world would ever understand if they happened to find it. It found her. 6 months later, but it found her. Thank you for leaving the light on. Then she wedged it down into the gap, and stood up, and put her hands in her pockets, and walked out of the park to go open her cafe, the way you go on with a life you very nearly didn't keep. I've told a lot of stories on this channel. I keep coming back to this one. I think it's the not knowing that does it. He never knew it landed. She didn't know who'd thrown the rope for years. The whole thing happened in the dark, between 2 strangers who sat on the same warped bench 6 months apart and never once laid eyes on each other. And it saved a life anyway. We spend so much of our energy on the kindnesses we get to watch land, the ones we get thanked for, the ones we get to feel good about. And maybe the ones that matter most are the ones we'll never see the end of. The note left in the gap. The light left on for whoever's coming behind us in the dark. I don't know if I'd have written that letter on my own worst afternoon. I'd like to think I'd have had it in me to leave something behind for a stranger instead of just carrying my own weight out of the park. But honestly, I'm not sure. Most of us aren't sure. And maybe that's the part worth carrying out of here, that you do not have to know where your kindness lands for it to land. You just have to leave the light on and trust the dark to carry it the rest of the way. This story is fictional, inspired by Keanu Reeves' well-known reputation for quiet, unwitnessed kindness toward strangers. The waitress, the bench, and the letter are invented. But somewhere out there is a bench, and somebody who needs to sit on it. And if you've ever clawed your way out of a winter of your own, you already know what to leave in the gap. If this one reached you, drop a comment and tell me about a stranger's kindness that found you at exactly the wrong moment and the best way. Share it with someone who might be having one of those afternoons right now. If you want more stories like this, subscribe, and I'll keep telling them. And if you're the one on the bench today, don't decide the big thing today. Just decide today. Tomorrow gets its own vote. See you in the next one.